Very good morning from the KTN News Center. Thank you for joining us this 15th day of October 2017, exactly 11 days to the October 26th repeat presidential election. This is Sunday edition, Kenya's only Sunday morning political show. For the next 2 hours or so, we shall be taking a look at what are the biggest political stories in this country. Of course, a lot happening surrounding that repeat presidential election. The IEBC, what next for them as they continue to prepare the country for that repeat presidential election? The latest intrigues from both sides of the political divide. Of course, the biggest story for the last 5 or so days, Raila Odinga withdrawing from the repeat poll. Ekuru Aukot being put back on the ballot. What next? Is there going to be an election on the 26th of October? Or what gives? Just what is the way forward for Kenya? My guests are already here in the studio. First of all, we'll start with some of the big stories, big headlines in the local newspaper dailies this Sunday morning, the Sunday Standard. But let me introduce my guests here on the show. I have with me Mutinda Kavemba, political strategist here with me. Thank you, sir, for joining me. I have with me the Member of Parliament for Ndiwa constituency. That is Martin Peters Owino, new on the show.
Yes.
Thank you, Mheshimiwa, for joining us
Thank
this morning. I have with me political strategist Brian Mbogwa, also not new here on the show. Thank you, Brian, for joining me. And political risk analyst Dismas Mokua here on the show. Thank you, Dismas, for joining us. On the Sunday Standard, the splash, it's back to the ICC. A Canadian law firm has been instructed by a local NGO here in Kenya to probe into Raila Odinga and Kalonzo Musyoka over the protests that have been ongoing for weeks in this country now. And there are murmurs or talk of, Kenya going back to the ICC on some, at some points. Also, the NASA leaders have been saying they will take the Inspector General of Police, Joseph Boynette, and the CS, the acting CS for security, Fred Matiang'i, to the ICC concern over police brutality, what they called police brutality. Dismas, is there any real meat to this story of the ICC?
Well, I think that's a lazy way of trying to get headline news, because Kenya right now has got very strong institutions. We have a Supreme Court that for the first time has annulled a presidential election, meaning that our criminal justice system can actually work. And if there's anybody with evidence around any issue, around crime, around politics, and they want it sorted out,
right, they
can actually use our judiciary. And if for some reason they are not able to trust the DPP, then they can institute private prosecutions. Any person who is speaking about ICC is really suggesting that Kenya is a failed nation, and Kenya is not a failed nation. Those are just lazy persons wanting page one attention.
All right. Brian, what is your take on this?
Well, I think we are still a signatory to the Rome Statute. We've not yet pulled out. So it's within their right to seek whatever intervention they are trying to seek. And I can say, just like the secession call in Kenya, which is not anchored in our constitution but international law.
All right.
So the same applies to this issue.
All right. Mheshimiwa, any real talk in this ICC story?
No, to me that is nonsense. You know, the protest and all the NASA is doing is constitutional. So for somebody to bring in ICC at this level as a prevention body, that does not make sense to me. What we need to do as Kenyans is to address our issues locally and squarely. So I think that, to me, it may be just a catch-up on the paper to make some gains. But I'm so sad that it's happening on Standard, which we rate very high. You should not have that kind of local news.
Well, our reporters on the Standard have documents they have seen to this effect. We'll see how this story pans out. Mutinda,
Yes.
What's your take on this?
As a matter of principle, I'm not a proponent of external solutions to our local problems.
Right.
Be it someone seeking external pressure for the powers that be to be forced into dialogue, or even using the ICC to threaten people. All that, for me, is really not the direction we should be taking as a country, because in the long run, we need to develop capacity to internally deal with our issues as Kenyans.
All right, on page 8 of the Sunday Standard, I will not resign, Commission Chairman says of a split fears. This is, of course, referring to the IEBC Chairman Wafula Chebukati, who say that he and other commissioners will not resign. Mutinda, how true or how real is this story of the splits at the IEBC, you know, just days before a very crucial repeat presidential election?
It's really unfortunate, but from what is happening, it is clear that they are yet to sort themselves out as a commission, because some of these things are betrayed by some of the actions they take. There is a time last week, I think, they released a statement that was not signed. That clearly told you that there is a problem, because if they'd all agreed on it, then they would easily have appended their signature to it, and or they would have allowed the chairman to do it on their behalf. But when they send a blank statement that no one is owning, then clearly it tells you that means that they did not get to a unanimous position on
They're not on the same page.
Yes, and it's quite worrying, considering that we only have 11 days. And I'm among the people who've been calling for them to realize that they have a constitutional mandate, and that the buck stops with them in regard to holding proper elections, and that it is in their interest for them to realize that, and do whatever they need to do to first agree that they need to finish this job at hand as a team, and whatever else that will need to be done to hold people accountable for purposes of posterity, so that in future going forward, people know that you won't mess up the election and it remains business as usual. Then it's important for them to differentiate that. I've always said that there are short-term issues that they need to deal with.
Right.
That is prior to the 26th October election, and then there are long-term issues that they'll also have to deal with after the election. So it's in the interest of the country and in their interest for them to come to terms with that reality,
right,
that we will not take excuses, and history is going to be very harsh on them, because eventually, if anything happens, it will be said to have been triggered by the failure of the IEBC to effectively deliver on their constitutional mandate.
All right. Much more the perception crisis at the IEBC, yes, said split. How big could it be, in the repeat presidential election?
First of all, let me say, the IEBC is not competent to hold this election. For example, if you are a chair, why should you go in the public and say, I'm not resigning? If you know you are not resigning, why should you even talk about it? We said from the beginning that if IEBC does not transform itself, it's not competent to oversee this election. One, but I think this falls squarely on Chebukati. Once you are given a seat, sit in the middle of the seat. Don't sit at the edge. You need to have a spine to oversee election in this country. And what we are seeing now is wishy-washy. There's no patchwork here, Ben, that can work. For example, you remember these guys, when the Supreme Court made a ruling,
right?
Chebukati came up and say, okay, now I want to transform this secretariat, and I come up with a team. And the week following, they were in Naivasha, retreat on bonding. That cleared everything that we're trying to do. That's what we call wishy-washy. You cannot, and I think that's why there's no election on 26, because the body is divided, the chair has no spine, and all players there are controlled from State House. And you cannot have a referee that take orders.
All right.
So they are not competent to oversee this election.
But you as NASA have a problem with Chiloba, not Chebukati. Is that correct position?
Yeah, but who is the chair of this commission? Chiloba is just a subset in the secretariat, which needed to have been transformed long time ago. Because when the Supreme Court said that there is illegalities, that means illegal issues were committed and irregularities. These were done by the secretariat, which Chiloba really holds. But let me say this, sometimes Kenyans should rise to be people who can step and decide to resign. Like in the Western. When President Nixon was corrupt in 1974, he resigned. He moved on. In Philippines, 10 cabinet secretaries offered the resignation. And Tony Blair recently, when they could not fix the BRIC tax, he resigned. Chiloba would have stepped out long time ago.
All right.
Why is he stepping out? It's obscene. And that's why we wanted to help him get out when we are doing these demos.
But Brian, is this split of the IBC a real thing, or is it being blown out of proportion?
Just to go to, on what Mheshimiwa said, I think also their candidate has done a right thing, because even the countries is quoting, when you lose an election like 4 times, you don't write a 5th one and a 4th one. So for IBC, I don't think there's a problem when people differ in opinions. The reason why I repeat that they are odd-numbered in the commission is so that when there is an issue, they debate it and they come to a vote if they cannot agree. What is happening is, from my understanding, based on the letter that Chebukati wrote, which some commissioner disowned, is like Chebukati was a one-man show in the commission, which is not also the right thing, because a commission consists of all the commissioners on board. So IBC has a right to have a difference of opinion, so long as it's working toward having a free, fair, and credible election on the 26th. All right.
Dismas.
Well, in my view, and as we indicated last week, this is the weakest commission we've ever had from the time we went to multi-party politics. You've got a chairman who does not know his responsibilities. Because, the appointment of a chairman and commissioners, those are 2 different lanes. Now, you've got a chairman who has the guts to admit in public that I'm not going to resign, as if that has been a matter that people have been thinking of. You've got a chairman who does not understand that he is supposed to have a steady hand in the management of IBC. Because where we sit right now, depending on how Chebukati behaves, Kenya's national security interests are going to be undermined. Kenya's prosperity is going to be undermined because of NASA and Jubilee. One fails to understand why Chebukati cannot have a very steady hand and look at Jubilee in the eye and say, you've raised a number of concerns, I'm going to address them. Look at NASA and say, you've raised a number of concerns, I'm going to address these issues. But at the end of the day, he's the one who's supposed to be making a decision. Now, it's created an environment that every single day, when the plenary at IBC wants to take a decision, for some reason, they're not able to get into a consensus. Everything has to be taken into a vote. It's created a situation whereby you've got outside influence at the plenary. Now we are made to understand there are a number of commissioners at IBC do not take independent decisions. They have to wait for instructions from elsewhere. Yes. So you begin to wonder, you are the chairman of IBC, the buck stops with you. Does he actually understand that depending on how you conduct elections in Kenya, Kenya may plunge into a crisis, Kenya may get into war. Actually, every single day, as we approach 26th, the lack of strong decisions coming from Chebukati is preparing Kenya for a disaster. And if you get to a place whereby you know for a fact you are unable to deliver, why can't you do the most honorable thing and take a walk, go home, so that you can create an opportunity for another strong arm to come and lead the organization? Because in 2007, Kenya almost got into trouble. We almost got into a civil war because we had a chairman who would not even control the returning officers, who wouldn't control the presiding officers. Now you've got a chairman who cannot harmonize the thinking of his commissioners. And as Brian has indicated, it's a very good idea to have divergence of views, cross-pollination of ideas, provided that in the interest of running a free, fair, and credible election. But now Chebukati is entertaining divergent views, not in the interest of a free, fair, and a credible election, but because those views are serving one player in the entire mathematics. And for elections that have been a success all over the world, there is maximum transparency and there is maximum consensus. Now, those 2 key ingredients are missing in this election. And one wonders, somebody in the caliber of Mr. Chebukati, who is qualified to be a judge of the Supreme Court?
Yes.
What stops him from doing the right thing at the right time? Because, you know, Kenya is not all about NASA. Kenya is not all about Jubilee. Kenya as a nation is all about Wanjiku. When he's taking those decisions, does he actually consider Wanjiku's interest? Because now Kenyans are now have come to a standstill. They cannot do business. They can't go to town. They can't invest in a shamba. They can't do anything. And the person where the buck stops is Mr. Chebukati and his commissioners. And if Chebukati was a man of high moral standing, of high values, he would have taken a walk because he's been paid a lot by the taxpayer. He's expected to deliver a free and fair election.
All right.
He's not doing the same.
All right. That story is on page 8 of the Sunday Standard. Still on that same page, Raila Odinga is was just visited the UK, where he had addressed a gathering in the United Kingdom, and President Uhuru Kenyatta has said that the country will not entertain international mediation in the elections. He said that Kenya was not in a crisis to warrant interference by the international community, accusing the NASA presidential candidate Raila Odinga of exerting pressure on the international community to set up a mediation team as a strategy to form a coalition government. We'll come to that, but before we come to that, still in the same tour of the UK, Jubilee and NASA supporters living in the UK clashed outside the Chatham House, where NASA flag bearer Odinga was addressing a gathering on Friday. Seemingly, the two sides of the political divide taking their protests to the diaspora. Let's take a look at what happened in those clashes.
Kenyans abroad, hata kama wafanye nini. Canaan lazima, we have to go to Canaan.
I'm so angry. I'm 76 years old. I know what I saw during my mouth period. And up to now, I can see what is happening.
He wants to leave these people in poverty for as long as he can, so that when he wants to demonstrate, when he wants to do what he wants for his own benefit, he calls out these people.
Some of our children are married to Kikuyus, others are living there in Kikuyu, and I have relatives living in Kiambu for many years. Yeah, but it's becoming worse if this enmity is going to continue. It is the duty of Uhuru to make sure that he talks with Raila and finish up this thing completely.
This is not the solution coming to UK. UK is not going to sort our problems. We Kenyans, he being one of them, we are the people who need to fix our own problems. It's not the UK government, really.
It was allowed. Democracy are you lecturing people in UK about? You went to the Supreme Court, your plea was accepted, and now you have held the nation as hostage by refusing to go to election.
He's here to bring a very positive message to Londoners and the world. So that's what we're doing. We're here to give him full support.
Kenyans living in the UK from both sides of the political divide, supporting different, some of them Uhuru supporters, others Raila Odinga supporters. Let's now listen into the key message as that Kenyan there was saying that Raila Odinga did take in that visit of the UK.
Many pro-democracy activists in Africa are no longer sure they have the support of the West. Many are not clear if it is still the policy of the West to stand only with regimes that promote open, free and fair elections, transparency, good governance and human rights, or we are in the era of anything goes.
All right, Dismas, many pundits have hit out at Raila Odinga of his address of that gathering in the UK, and him, even Uhuru Kenyatta accusing him of seeking foreigners' help in the presidential bid. Of course, Raila Odinga has said that what he said was something very important for the democracy that is Kenya. What's your take on this?
Well, number one, Ben, to be invited to deliver a speech at Chatham House is a sign of prestige, that the entire world wants to listen to your conversation. And anybody who gets invited, in my view, must take the earliest opportunity and get a visa or go to the UK and make his position. But what is interesting about those demonstrations is that you have two groups. One is pro-Raila and one is pro-Uhuru, doing demonstrations in a place one would imagine is the CBD of London. And they're doing this free of tear gas. I did not see any policeman trying to give them a beating.
They were not carrying stones.
Now, for the Jubilee supporters, obviously, who are doing the demonstration, is a contradiction, that they wouldn't want to see those demonstrations in Kenya, but they would want to have the demonstration take place in the UK. So they can exercise their right to demonstration in the UK, but they don't want others to exercise their right of demonstration in Kenya. But the message you're supposed to take home is, in the UK, you see there are no stones and there are no running battles. And even for the Kenyans who are engaging in demonstrations, they must do that, but respect other people's rights. If you're found carrying a stone, if you're found carrying a weapon, then the police must pick you in a surgical manner and make you answerable. But the way we've seen the Kenyan police handling the demonstrations in Kenya is really unacceptable. I mean, in one incident, it's been reported that the police gave a 74-year-old woman a thorough beating. One really begins to wonder whether a 74-year-old woman can actually pose a threat to the Kenya police. And you know, the law is very clear that the only time you use a weapon is when your life is under threat. And one wonders whether the 74-year-old woman was actually, posing a threat to anybody. Then coming to the issue of President Kenyatta, we live in a global village. If for some reason we are not able to manage our own local affairs, then there's nothing wrong for us to seek international help. Because the world, the UN Security Council will not sit by and watch Kenya degenerate simply because the local leadership does not want international help. But as a nation, we must behave in a manner that we do not allow Kenya to be held hostage by two personalities or two political parties to an extent that we are not able to manage our affairs, that every single day we have to keep on running to New York, to the UN Security Council to get external help. If our house is in order, then there would be no need for anybody to come. Our neighbors wouldn't have a reason to come around here. But because for some reason our house is not in order, then international help is inevitable.
Brian, is Kenya degenerating into that path of not being able to control our affairs?
That's not true at all. As Dismas alluded before on the issue of ICC, it's him himself who said that we have a functioning Supreme Court that annulled the first election. We have so according to him, you are giving with one hand and taking with another hand. Kenya is a working nation, and the only negotiation we will be having is on the 26th when the people decide. Because what you saw in those demonstrations is people picking sides. So it's a political context. Political context is solved with numbers. You have your stand, I have your stand. Let's go to vote, see who the winner is. And that's what we want. Now we have Raila Odinga, who was given a second chance by the Supreme Court. He has done zero campaign. People are leaving him left, right, and center. He's not been able to hold the battlegrounds. And he has no clear path to victory. That's why he's dilly-dallying and looking for panya route for Nusu Mkate government. And we've been here before, and we know where he's headed. That's why the president said we are not yet a failed state. The people are ready and willing to go to the poll on the 26th to decide on their leaders. So until that fails, or until any other major thing happens, as far as we are concerned, we have to have an election on the 26th, and Kenya decide on their leaders. Not a few Wazungu sitting in...
Ben, allow me to buttress the point raised by Brian, which is very interesting. The Supreme Court in their judgment said the elections were anchored by illegalities and irregularities.
Yes.
It's very curious that as we are 10 days to the election, Mr. Chebukati and Mr. Chiloba have actually not informed Kenyans what were these illegalities, what were these irregularities. They have not demonstrated to Kenya, and they have not come up to tell Kenyans these are the interventions that place. Instead, what we keep on seeing are leaking memos from the chairman's office, from the CEO's office, and for you to expect anybody to say that the numbers which are going to come out of this process reflect the will of the people, we must have those predictable systems for unpredictable outcomes. And I would expect that Brian here would be so furious with Mr. Chiloba and Chebukati because they denied his presidential candidate a win. Because the Supreme Court found Mr. President Kenyatta rather was not found with any illegalities, any crime. But instead he's at IBC. I would have expected that the same energy Brian has over here to be directed to Chebukati and Chiloba.
Because I've been mentioned response to that.
Even up to yesterday, I was reading that ruling. And when you see that ruling, it's clearly headlined on the part of illegalities, on the part of irregularities, on the part of the order sought, and where they come to. On the part of illegalities, the judges dismissed everything. They said the one part was undue influence by the president, campaigned by the cabinet secretary. Those were the most illegal things that they were being sought by the petitioners. And the court dismissed everything for lack of evidence. In fact, I wonder why they said there was a lot of illegalities and irregularities. On the issue of irregularity, the main point that the court said is the difference between Form 34Bs and Form 34As.
All right, thank you. Let's hear Mheshimiwa's thought on this issue where Uhuru is accusing Raila Odinga of seeking foreigners' help in the presidency in the bid for the presidency.
Ben, first of all, let me say this. I watched the president talking yesterday. It's a pity. This is not the first time Raila is doing an international lecture outside. I happen to stay overseas for over 20 years. Could come to Boston, could come to Harvard and do it. And Raila is doing these things in good faith. But yesterday, you know, we should have a separation here between a candidature and a presidency. What you see streaming on the streets here is stemming from our country, and it is shameful. Now, chapter 6 of our Constitution talks about the dignity a president and the honor a president should bring to our country. Telling the Western to buy for Raila a ticket to come back to Kenya from a president, that is belittling your countrymen and subjecting to kind of embarrassment and shame. So what I can say, first of all, to the president, what he will be remembered of here is the leadership during crisis. How did you handle the presidency, leave alone your candidacy? And because that affects the people who are outside. What goes to the streets in London comes from Kenya.
All right.
Now, let me respond to what my friend have said here. And I think this is where we should come up to our own facts. This Nusmukati, I've had it a long time. And it is not being put in good faith. Usually, it has innuendos and also to demean your opponent. Nobody wants Nusmukati. What we want in Kenya is the right to vote, as he says, but those votes should be counted. Right now, as we speak here, the outcome of August election is in the Saba, in France, which the IBC have refused to open. So let us sober up.
Right.
There is a problem. Let us not deny there's no problem.
All right, I want us to get
then
into
there's
that.
a problem.
I want us to get into that. Let me get you.
Yes, allow me to say something about that appeal.
Yes.
Like, just like I've said about the ICC, that I'm not a proponent of that kind of approach where you want to invoke the ICC so that you scare people. It's also in the same breath that I am very much opposed to the call that was made by, because it's really not about the talk. I would want to correct Mheshimiwa there. No one is opposed to him giving talks, but the content of the talk is the issue here. What is it? He was very clear. He was even asked, are you inviting us to try and he said yes, that in Africa when our neighbor's house is burning, you don't even wait for invitation. To me, that really betrayed the whole game plan that he is trying to implement in all this. It was actually a bit premature. Because, and why do I have a problem with that? In 2007, 2008, the international community came because of what we had here in this country. And they helped us come together. And we actually, as part of that, we gave birth to the 2010 Constitution. It is only 7 years old. The question is there really need for that? Only 7 years down the line. You see, if, for instance, the Supreme Court had ruled that we nullify the presidential election, and the incumbent was he refused that, then I would understand when you're calling the international community, because that would mean that we are now getting out of our constitutionalism, the rule of law. But as at now, even the incumbent himself has made sure that whatever he does remains in the confines of the Constitution and the law. So what is this extreme situation that makes you go and call outsiders to try and come in, yet we are just within the framework, we are competing within the constitutional framework, as we all agreed as Kenyans.
Let me just a simple point on that.
The people who went to to demonstrate
in
London. Yes, there's nothing wrong with that. I think we simply just exported the vibrancy of our democracy. It would have been very unfair to have a picture given that there is only all Kenyans have a problem with what is happening. What came out clearly is that these people need to be left alone to sort out their issues. They've even exported the issues to other countries. It was not one-sided. I liked that about the demo.
Let's take a quick commercial break. I want you to hold that thought. I am very, I'm glad that there's an air of expectancy in this studio over the next discussion. When we return after this quick commercial break, we shall get into the real politic that is currently ongoing in the country. We'll talk about Raila Odinga's withdrawal from the presidential race, repeat presidential race for the 26th of October. He has not, IBC has said he has not signed the statutory Form 24A to exit officially or procedurally from the ballot, but he says he will not sign it. We'll talk about all that, plus Ekuru Court's inclusion under the orders of the High Court of Kenya.